Valheim is blowing up the Steam charts right now. It's selling like hotcakes and it's one of the most played games on Steam right now. A lot of survival game fans who need that itch scratched have become enamored with this game. But I'm sure the question on most people's minds is, what is Valheim, and does this game live up to the already massive amount of hype and expectations that people have for it? Valheim presents a beautiful, procedurally generated world, with varied biomes that all look and fit perfectly with the Norse mythos. You'll travel through swamps, deep wooded forest areas, snowy mountains, the vast and terrifying ocean, and much more. This game just sucks you into its world and atmosphere so easily. The light shafts and floating particles help make this game so beautiful looking. Valheim has a very low poly Breath of the Wild-esque art style to it, and while it isn't the most realistic looking, it doesn't need to be, and this game will look fantastic forever because of its stylized art direction. The game's enemies are nice and varied, each biome brings you new unique foes to fight, and they're all very fitting within Norse mythology. The bosses feel fittingly epic in scope and design, and while some enemies don't look great, it's charming in how comically ugly some of the models look. The weapons and armor you make all look great. It's easy to be proud of how your character looks while maintaining Norse immersion, and the houses and halls that people have already made are incredibly impressive. Valheim is also surprisingly well optimized for being an early access release. It's surprising to me that at the time of this video, the game is only 1 GB. And it doesn't have the most intense system requirements, so I feel like most people with standard gaming rigs could run this game just fine. The music in this game is extremely pleasing to listen to. It blends beautifully with whatever you're doing, and I feel like it's never too intrusive. A lot of survival games try to have this epic soundtrack that stands out, but I always appreciate the simplicity of a score that is nice to listen to, but doesn't distract you from the action too much. Overall, Valheim is a really easy game to get sucked into. It does a great job of immediately immersing you in its environment with its gorgeous visuals and perfectly non-intrusive score. The nitty-gritty of survival games is collect, craft, improve, and kill, all while maintaining a healthy food, thirst, and health bar. If you've played any survival game before, then this is basically the standard formula. Valheim is definitely one of those, but I feel like it does enough things differently to make this a somewhat unique experience. When you start off a fresh world in Valheim, you have nothing. You only know how to make a club or an axe, and every time you pick up materials such as stone, wood, or bronze, you learn crafting recipes that are relevant to the material you picked up. It gets a little more advanced than that, but those are the basics of unlocking recipes in Valheim. I feel like this really helps give each biome a purpose. They all have new materials for you to collect and new recipes to learn. It paces out the game's progression really well, and it gives great incentive to explore your surroundings, and it kind of forces you to expand and build multiple bases that are linked. Speaking of which, the building and construction elements of Valheim are surprisingly intuitive and well designed. It's refreshingly easy to make a house that both functions and looks decent. I mean, what I can build is nowhere near as good as what other people can build, but I feel like I can make a solid enough base, and other games don't have this level of detail when it comes to making a nice looking structure. It's a little difficult to get the roofs just right, and I feel like the starter doors are really short, but I like this game's building, especially when you start dealing with stone and iron materials. The absolute worst thing about the game's building is the limitations of buildable space. So in order to construct buildings in Valheim, you first need to place a workbench. This places a circle around you, and then you can build within it. It really starts to become an issue when you're out and about and you just want to set up a quick base or place a campfire. So for example, let's say you go out to mine copper ores. The only thing you bring with you is a pickaxe and maybe an axe to fight enemies because ores are extremely heavy and you want to carry as much of them as you can. When you do mine, it's extremely common for enemies called grey dwarfs to swarm at you, which is annoying, distracts you from mining, and it fills your inventory with garbage you don't want. So what you can do is build campfires around the rock because they do not like fire. So you get out your axe, chop some trees down, get some wood and get some stone, and you pull out your hammer. You plop the workbench down, but wait, you can't use the workbench until it's covered. So you chop down a little bit more trees so that you can build a shelter around it, and then you can finally use it and place your campfires around the ore and mine in peace. This really wouldn't be that annoying if I could just use the workbench without it needing to be covered. I understand if the area is raining or there's a snowstorm, but it's aggravating when it's a perfectly clear sunny day and I can't build structures because the workbench is exposed to non-existent elements. I also feel like the build radius is a little too small, especially when you're trying to construct bridges. The game also has farming and animal husbandry on top of a pretty fleshed out cooking system with a lot of recipes. Hunger works a little differently in this game than other survival games. Rather than having just a bar for you to manage, the food and drinks in Valheim only temporarily increase your health and stamina, rather than needing to be a constant thing that you manage. You'd eat and drink while you're adventuring or fighting bosses, but when you're at home building structures or smelting ores, you don't even need to worry or think about it. It's neat and I like the system, don't get me wrong. The only issue I have with how health and stamina works is how your stamina is drained. Things like fighting and chopping down trees drain your stamina, which makes sense since you're exerting energy or whatever, but building? Why does building drain your stamina meter? I mean, it's not like you're physically getting on the ground and assembling your house one nail at a time. Sure, it's realistic, I guess. Building a home would probably be very tiring, but games like 7 Days to Die and Rust also have a stamina bar and base building, but they draw the line when it comes to that because it just intrudes on progress for no reason and it becomes annoying to deal with. Combat in Valheim is really hit or miss for me. Like I mentioned earlier, food and drink increase your health and stamina, temporarily making you last longer in battle. Unfortunately, I feel like this game has a really clunky combat system. It's almost there, and I can appreciate what they're going for, but combat encounters feel really awkward at times and can be frustrating when there's large groups of enemies coming at you, which happens frequently. I feel like dodge roll is really clunky because of how weird it feels to right click and press spacebar to roll, especially when the two buttons are already mapped to block and jump respectively. Maybe I just suck, but I found myself in multiple situations where I swear I blocked or jumped instead of rolling when I meant to roll. If it had its own dedicated button, maybe this wouldn't be so bad, but as of right now, you can't rebind the roll, so I just ignore it. I resort to using shields and kiting with the bow and arrow when I encounter larger enemies. Valheim has plenty of skills to level up and improve, and much like games like Skyrim, the more you use these skills, the better you get at them. The progression is nicely paced, although slightly unnoticeable. Like, I'm sure the difference between level 99 woodcutting and level 1 woodcutting is night and day, but you won't really notice your character getting better until you directly compare the two. I'm not stating this as a bad thing per se, I'm just saying I don't really like games that do incremental stat increases when it has an RPG system. Obviously, in a perfect world, I would prefer a perk tree that further unlocks crafting recipes or provides meaningful buffs or stat boosts to your character. I'm not sure if that's planned, but I feel like while the skills are nicely paced, they don't really justify their own existence in my opinion. The boss encounters are pretty neat. I won't go too much into detail with this because I'd hate to spoil things, but these fights are pretty damn cool. The bosses give some pretty useful buffs. They remind me a lot of Breath of the Wild's powers that you get. The buffs are mostly stat increases rather than fundamental game changers, but I still really enjoy the bosses in Valheim, and I'm really excited to see what they add next, because they could very easily add game-changing powers like Breath of the Wild has, you know, the ability to let you fly temporarily or run really fast or like walk on water, things like that. Just powers that make you feel like a god, even if it is just temporarily. As you explore the open world and learn new recipes, you'll discover that there are a few ways to traverse the open world. The game offers a vast amount of boats as well as portals to make traveling a whole lot easier. I really love that the game offers both of these means of transportation, and in a way they synergize really well. For example, in order to set a portal, you first have to discover the land by boat or walking and then build your portal there. It makes you do the journey and you feel like you earned the convenience of fast travel, and I love it. The controversial element of this feature is the fact that you can't set up a portal to a good mining spot in your base, because you can't teleport with ores in your inventory. The game just doesn't allow it. Reason being, I'm assuming, is that they don't want you to have an easy and constant access to metals, I suppose. As some people in the community really hate this feature and think it's overly punishing, while others love it, stating that it's a testament to how hardcore this game is, and if this feature was a thing, it would completely eliminate the need for boats in the late game. I totally understand people who feel that way, and I can legitimately see the argument as to why we shouldn't be able to transport ores. But honestly, I feel like this mechanic is way more annoying and punishing than necessary. It'd be one thing if ore veins were permanent, but after you deplete the resource, it's gone forever, so it really makes no sense to limit the player in that way since ore veins are already non-permanent. At the same time, I totally understand why people love sailing to and from mining spots. It's extremely exhilarating to be fighting strong winds or a sea serpent when your boat and inventory is filled to the brim with ore and you're desperately trying to get back to your base. Honestly, I feel like there's a really simple solution to this. Just make it a toggle option when you're creating a server. A lot of games these days offer more control of how you want your survival experience. If that's planned for Valheim, I'd love to see major world tweaks like these enabled for the best possible gameplay for that particular group of people or individual player. The game definitely has some annoying quirks that come with any early access game. For example, I feel like the inventory system is a little clunky, and I also hate that you can't destroy or junk any items you don't want. For example, enemies have a chance to drop their trophy, which is cool for displaying in your base, but after a while your inventory and chests just get crowded with these things. What some people have resorted to doing is going off on their boats packed with this stuff, and then they go to the middle of the ocean to dump other crap into the ocean, which is fine, although not very environmentally friendly, but the problem is items don't despawn, which means they stay in the world and they can bog performance down after a while. Now keep this in mind, this is an extreme cases and it doesn't happen that often, but it's still something I gotta keep in mind while playing. The thing that I hope for in the future is either a trash or a junk button, or they just add more uses for these items, because currently there is a lot of items in this game that only have one use, and unfortunately that one use you just kind of stop using after a while. Valheim is an absolutely amazing start for Coffee Stain Studios. It's a blast whether you're playing alone or a group of friends. It's an insanely polished experience that has a promising future and a pretty exciting roadmap. I'm really happy that this game is getting the success it deserves, and I really hope that Coffee Stain continues this game's momentum, because I honestly believe that this game can be the next big multiplayer game that has longevity.